सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There is a peculiar and cruel problem with wars. The longer they go on, the longer they last, the more brutal they begin, the more destruction they cause. At the same time, generally in our mind space, the more forgettable they become. Take for example the 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Initially there was a lot of excitement, a lot of global headlines and all. After that, the world just forgot about it. It's as if Iran and Iraq kept on fighting mainly as if to entertain themselves. They were not doing it to entertain themselves. They were seeing a lot of people killed on either side and really cruel things being done to their prisoners of war, etc. But the world forgot the war, and that is what is now tending to happen with the longest war, at least in our times. And this is an ongoing war, longest war between large conventional forces, one much larger than the other, that's Russia, which is the deputy superpower of the world, and second, Ukraine, a much smaller power and a much smaller country, but also heavily supported by the big Western powers. So that war has gone on. That war has gone on for 10 months now. 10 months is almost 300 days, and there is no sign of a let-up. Now, we tend to forget this. When was the last time you saw a story on the Ukraine war on the front pages of your papers, or maybe on any of your channels, even the channels who had sent people earlier on to cover the war? They've lost interest because it's not even TRP friendly. But the fact is, a very brutal war is taking place. A lot of people are dying. A lot of them are dying in Ukraine. Many are dying in Russia as well. That is Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers are suffering heavy casualties. In Ukraine, soldiers and civilians are suffering casualties, and now Ukraine's infrastructure, power system, their communication, all that is being hit repeatedly by the Russians. So this is total war. This is total war of the kind that our generation hasn't seen. And this has now lasted, as I just told you, for 10 months, and it's going to go on. So three things have happened now. Why are we taking a look? Why are we revisiting the war situation? One, because it is a big story, and whatever might happen on the ground, that is something that changes. It's a fluid battleground over 1500 kilometers, over a 1500 kilometer front. Whatever happens along that front, in any case, this war is redefining global relations, global power equations, the decisions that countries are making, the existing blocks that are changing, readjustments, realignments, etc. But in the middle of this, there are the Ukrainians and there are the Russian soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers as well as civilians and Russian soldiers. So three things have made us focus on this war today. So one reason is the interview that the Ukrainian Armed Forces Chief, General Zaluzhny, has given to Shashank Joshi of The Economist. It's a long interview. Please read it. I'll share a link with you and look at the things he's saying. Number two is just this indication that the Russians now, in a way, are using the earlier Ukrainian tactics on them. That is using drones, using masses of drones, large numbers of drones to direct fire at Ukrainian positions. So first of all, the Russians have pulled back their own positions, which the Ukrainians HIMARS would have targeted. HIMARS is the most effective artillery that the Americans have given the Ukrainians. So the Russians have now withdrawn their artillery, their ammunition dumps, their big armed forces concentrations beyond the range of the HIMARS. That is what General Zaluzhny has said in this interview. That's one. But at the same time, Russians are now unleashing a lot of drones, and these are small drones, small cheap drones called Orlan 10, and you can see the picture. Now you know what? These are not very sophisticated drones. These are very simple drones that don't even cost very much. In fact, these drones operate in pairs. So one drone goes at about 1,500 meters. That's about 5,000 feet or thereabouts. From there, that is the drone that does surveillance. Surveillance means it picks out the target. So that drone can identify and pick out and locate, say, a Ukrainian tank or a Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle or a Ukrainian artillery piece, right, from that altitude. Then there is a second one. These guys are hunting in pairs. Then there is a second one which is for electronic warfare. That is then jamming Ukrainian electronic systems, also trying to protect itself and the other guy, because this is a buddy pair of drones. You know, in commando warfare, they always operate in buddy pairs. Each one watches the other's back. So in this case, that's what's happening. So second one is for electronic warfare, and sometimes there is a third one. In fact, increasingly now there is a third one. That's for data relay. Right? So the data that these two collect is then relayed by the third one. They are not one on top of the other. They are in distant places. So that's why effectively the range at which the target identified by drone 1 can be conveyed to your own artillery or your own strike resources in the back becomes much larger, because from drone 1 to drone 2 to drone 3. Now the fact is that Ukrainians shoot down a lot of these drones. If you look at all the data, it looks like the Russians have produced about 1,500 of these drones. Some of these have been sold overseas, some have been sold to the Kazakhstan Armed Forces, although right now Russia and Kazakhstan don't exactly have the best of relations. Some have been sold to the Myanmarese army, Tatmadaw. Some have been used or given away in Syria, but still 1,500 was a large number. Ukrainians claim they've shot down nearly 900. Now, there may be some exaggeration, I don't know. Ukrainians claim they've shot down 900, or including 85 of those Orlan 10s that were armed. Some Orlan 10s can be armed. It's a very light and small drone. How small it is, I will tell you. Its takeoff weight, maximum takeoff weight is only 15 kilos, 15 kilo, only 15 kilos. And the maximum payload it can carry is 6 kilos. But you know, you've seen those videos where these small drones just carrying a grenade or an anti-tank grenade or a rocket or a little shell can drop it. If it can drop it over the right target, it comes silently. It can be very demoralizing, besides being very destructive. It's not very fast. It's only 150 kilometers per hour. Its range is not bad. It's a 600 kilometer periphery. So once again, if you can imagine 1, 2 and 3 working together in a relay, that range can be a lot, and it can create quite a bit of trouble. It has cameras, it has optical cameras, thermal imaging cameras, and also what is called as FPV cameras. FPV's first person view, which is like a remote view camera, which means the camera can relay pictures at the back. So a commander sitting in the back can see the picture that the drone is seeing. So this is the rise of these drones. Russians have been slow in drone warfare. Initially, it was the Ukrainians who brought in the Bayraktars and used them to great effect, particularly against stalled Russian armor on the highway to Kyiv, which was just piled up there as if not knowing where to go, searching for directions. So those Bayraktar drones picked out a lot of that. The Russians, in the course of time, figured out a way of dealing with Bayraktars. They began shooting down many. So once again, the Ukrainians readapted and they started using Bayraktars from a distance, mainly to identify targets so they could inform their artillery in the back, particularly after Ukraine got higher range artilleries, including the HIMARS. Again, Bayraktars were also working in sort of buddy pairs, so one identifying, relaying to the other, which relays back the information. But Bayraktar is an expensive drone. Ukraine started with 50, then each time it orders 50 or 30 or 20, Turks make them. This is an expensive one. The Russian drone, on the other hand, is the exact definition of what we might call as Sasta Sundar or Tikau. So it is this Sasta Sundar and Tikau drone which is making a difference for the Russians now. Now, this is the second point. What is the third point? The third point is, I just mentioned to you that Russians so far had made only 1,500 or so of these at max. And many of those were sold overseas or used overseas, like in Syria, and were consumed or used overseas. And a lot have been shot down because these are not difficult to shoot down. They are pesky, but flying at 150 kilometers max, just about 4,000, 5,000 feet, you can bring it down even with machine guns and things. So in an active battlefield environment, a lot will get shot down. So what you need is, while it may be Sasta Sundar or Tikau, you need a large number of these. Now for the Russians to continue to resupply their armed forces with this large number, they need many parts, particularly microchips, electronics, cameras, imaging equipment. All of that is packed into this tiny, quite cheap piece of machine. In fact, two of these operating in tandem, along with their launcher and a combat station. With all of that and spare parts, at least one set of spare parts, is just about $1,60,000. How much money is that? That's less than 1.5 crore rupees or thereabouts, right? That's like the price of an expensive luxury car these days. Really, super luxury car these days. So with that, you can do a lot of damage. But the problem is, to make these, you can make the dhacha, you can make the airframe, Russians can do that. But to put all the stuff it can carry, they need to import technology. And you know what? A lot of that technology is coming from American sources. Here we are, Americans are backing Ukraine in the war. Americans are bankrolling, underwriting all of Ukraine's, not just expense, but giving them all their frontline equipment or a lot of their frontline equipment. And some of that is being busted by drones which have been powered, or whose eyes and whose ears, etc., come from American sources. So this is the case of Miyan ki juti, Miyan ke sir. And where have we got that information from? Reuters has just run a major investigation, of which I'll share a link with you. I'll give you some highlights from it, but I'll share a link with you. And that tells us how, through a complex web of companies, a company in St. Petersburg in Russia, which makes these drones, buys these key materials or tech from another company based in the same building, the same address in St. Petersburg. That company is linked to a company in Hong Kong. Together, they are able to import a lot of this stuff from America and then send it to Russia, defying the sanctions. That also tells you how difficult it is to maintain the sanctions. In fact, not just that, they've also been able to get some Japanese tech into Russia for making precisely this drone. Now, who are the people involved? So if you look at the Reuters investigation, they tells you that millions of dollars in parts has been imported by these Russian companies, but not directly. And this includes microchips, which are made in America. They are exported to an importer in St. Petersburg. That's called SMT iLogic. That's a firm, SMT iLogic. It has the same address as the drone maker. The drone maker is a company called STC, or Special Technology Company. That's also a Russian company. So one Russian company makes the drones. Another Russian company, it's like a cutout, imports the samagri for the drones and sells it to the other. And they do it through a company in Hong Kong. Now the company in Hong Kong is Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific owner is a man called Anton Trofimov, who lives in Canada. He's a Russian expat with a Chinese degree, Chinese university degree, but lives in Canada. Reuters correspondents actually went to his home, rang the bell, his wife answered, said he'll call back, but never called back. Between March and September this year, this company, Asia Pacific, did a business of $5.2 million compared to $2.3 million in the same period last year. This company is the biggest supplier to SMT iLogic, which does 80% of all its business with STC, which is the company that makes the drones. Now you might say, okay, 5 million? Did Shekhar Gupta mean to say billion but had a slip of the tongue? No, these are very cheap drones. That is the main point. Now, $1.8 billion worth of these chips, the Reuters story tells us, were bought from Analog Devices. $6.4 million worth from Texas Instruments. Another $238,000 worth from a company called Xilinx, which is owned by AMD. In each cases, the owner said they had no idea this was going to be sold to a Russian end user. They sold it to somebody else. In fact, the same network also imported a bunch of model aircraft engines made by the Japanese firm Saito Seisa Kusho. These are used in Orlan 10 as well. I told you this is a very simple technology, simple, small and light machine. Now, Reuters correspondents even reached out to Alexei Terentiev, who's one of the co-founders and among the topmost scientists at STC, and they asked him if he was getting the smuggled stuff. Obviously, he said no, but he also boasted that, look, the government, the military wants our orlans, the demand is so high, very much more than we can produce. Sanctions were imposed on us by one of the most powerful countries in the world. He's quoted as saying, we should be proud of that. Frankly, what he's trying to say is, he should be proud, or they should be proud of the fact that they are getting around these sanctions so easily. The same investigation also tells us about a man in Florida called Igor Kazdan. Igor Kazdan was arrested before the war began. He was arrested before the war began because he was exporting technologies to Russia, which Obama had already banned in 2016. He announced the ban. 2017, the ban came into effect. That's because he saw some of these companies getting involved with Russian intelligence to try and influence American elections. So Mr. Kazdan was exporting to the same companies. He was arrested. He was indicted on 13 counts. He pleaded guilty to a few of those. Now, among the things that he picked up and exported to Russian end users were cameras made by a company called Gumsticks. How does the world know about this? The reason the world knows about this is that many of the Orlan 10 drones shot down by the Ukrainians had these cameras, and these were then identified and traced back. We say in an ideal situation, quality triumphs. Nothing can beat quality. But you know what? In many situations, particularly war-like situations, quantity is also quality. You may be having one aircraft which is the best fighter aircraft in the world, but if the other side has 20 coming up against it, 30, 40, then quantity also becomes quality. So what the Russians are doing is, they have sort of not exactly turned the tables, but they've restored the balance in the drone airspace. One, by buying a whole bunch of these Iranian drones, Shahed 136, or what the Russians call Geranium 2. Those are kamikaze drones. They carry a heavier warload of 30 to 50 kg, so they can do a lot of damage. So they can also be directed at power plants, power grids, etc., etc. And the Russians are doing it. But with that, Russians also are now using large numbers of these Orlan 10 drones. Now, in a large warfare along a 1500 kilometer battlefront, this will not make all of the difference, but this is making a sizable difference, because this is denying the Ukrainians one superiority they had. Also, shooting down, using a missile to shoot down one of these drones is not that much of a satisfaction. One, because it costs you money to fire that missile. Maybe you'll fire 3 or 4 or 5 and shoot down a drone. And second, another one will just come in because they are so cheap. So this has also played a key role in stabilizing the front for the Russians. So Ukrainians had been recovering territory since Kherson. They haven't moved forward to recover any territory. And looks like the Russians are now licking their wounds. They are waiting. They are using this time of respite to then build up for a spring offensive as the snows melt or as the winter thaws. Because in winter time, not that much mass warfare will happen. And chances are that come February, come March, they will launch a fresh offensive. And where do we get an indication from? I'll bring you back to the point where we started. That is the Zaluzhny interview in The Economist. He says the Russians have built up their reserves. They're training their reserves. They're 2 lakh people. They are effective. He says they are not useless. They are like the Tsar's army. Tsars ordered them to fight. They will go and fight. They may not be that terrific, but they will be a formidable army. And he thinks that his view is that in the course of time, which obviously means before the summer begins or just as winter is ending, Russians will make one more attempt to take Kyiv. So obviously his appeal is to his Western friends to give him tanks. He says he needs 300 tanks, 600 to 700 infantry fighting vehicles. He needs more air defense, etc., more artillery, more long-range artillery, because he's complaining the Russians have now gone beyond the range of his HIMARS, so he wants HIMARS with longer range missiles. So all of that is there. But the important thing is there is an expectation which the Ukrainian Armed Forces chief also confirms, that the Russians are using this respite to regroup, to build more resources, to build more ammunition, that's very important, and to then use that new firepower and the new manpower, because they now have at least 2 lakh more soldiers under training to launch a fresh assault on Kyiv, maybe 3 to 4 months from now.